Good evening, everybody, or possibly good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. It's day 4 of the Inspire Education Summit, and I don't know about anyone else here, but I am certainly feeling inspired and uplifted this week. I'm Alex O'Neill, host of the Limitless Changemakers podcast, and also your host for the summit sessions this week. Wherever you are in the world, I hope these talks are bringing you sparks of new ideas and inspiration for ways you can take action and make the world a better place. If you've missed anything so far this week, please don't worry. All sessions have been recorded and will be sent out to you next week by email. So look out in your inboxes for those. Also, next week, in our last session of the summit, I am very excited to announce that there will be a new and exciting membership platform launched for those who have ever had that germ of an idea that they want to create their own school or learning community. I've been working alongside Joe Symes from Progressive Education to bring you this new platform, as well as this summit this week. And you'll get to find out more about that next Monday, 25th of November at 7:30 p.m. GMT. Or if you can't make that, check out your emails. Going back probably more than 15 years or so now, I remember the evening that I watched Sir Ken Robinson's famous TED Talk on bringing creativity into education. In fact, I remember watching it whilst I was doing some washing up in the kitchen, and I remember the feeling of my brain lighting up, full of ideas and a new way of seeing the world. It's a feeling that everyone deserves, and ultimately is why I created Limitless and the Limitless podcast. I want to give everyone the opportunity to feel those brain sparks, the excitement of potential, the burning energy to fulfill a purpose which feels outside of yourself, but also exactly what you're supposed to do. The chance to be, in Ken's words, in your element. It's a feeling that can strike you in all sorts of places. Perhaps you're feeling it here and now this week after listening to some of the speakers at this summit. It might come from a conversation with someone new, maybe whilst drawing or painting or going for a walk or riding a bike. You might even have been lucky enough to get that feeling at school. The truth is, though, that many, if not most young people, never get that feeling at school and will in fact be ground down with years of stress and struggle. And yet our younger years give us so much potential for great inspiration and creativity in our lives. Learning is the lifeblood of humanity, and we're here at this summit to bring the best learning opportunities to all of our young people. Our guest speaker this evening has thankfully also been inspired by her father Ken's work and continues to bring energy to others to create more opportunities like this in our education systems. Kate Robinson is a passionate advocate for unleashing human potential through creativity and education. She is the co-author of Imagine If, Creating a Future for Us All, which serves as the manifesto for her father, Sir Ken Robinson. Kate is dedicated to continuing Sir Ken's legacy and champions creativity as an essential skill for navigating an uncertain future. She inspires audiences to radically rethink existing systems, envisioning a world built on creativity, collaboration, and compassion. Kate firmly believes in our collective power to recreate the worlds we inhabit. And if that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what will. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, Kate. I welcome you to the floor or the screen this evening.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that introduction. That was a great bio. Did I write that bio? was that my bio? Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Joe, as well, for the invitation to take part in what has been an incredible event so far. So congratulations on several days now, several very full-packed days of programming.
Yes, it's been a busy week.
Yeah. Well, I am here this evening or afternoon or morning, wherever you are, to share some items that we have from the Sir Ken Robinson archive and talk a little bit about how we plan on using them to continue the movement that Dad was so instrumental in sparking, or certainly carrying on. And to share a little bit about the work that we've been doing on his legacy and the plans that we have for it. By way of context, we have so when Dad was very sick and when he was dying, he pulled me to one side in a very him way and said, there are some boxes in storage. Would you mind, as and when you have a moment, would you mind putting them together into an archive and keeping them wherever it is that you end up being? So I said, sure. And then it took, we wrote the book and it took a while after he'd passed away to be brave enough to go. And when he said some boxes, what we found was 160 boxes of his entire life's work, of his entire life. We have, I'm going to show you some slides in a second, but we have absolutely everything from his childhood diaries right the way through to his last talk notes, which he gave in August 2020, 18 days before he passed away, which is just incredible. So I'm gonna jump into it. Is that all right? Can I share my screen and show you what I got?
Go for it.
It was kind of tricky to pick. There is so much, and it's kind of tricky to pick what translates on in a format like this to be interesting. I could have picked. We have folders and binders and all sorts of things. But I'm going to show you. Let's see. Let's share the screen. Okay, can you see that? Awesome. So this photo, if you've been following his legacy at all, we use these photos quite a bit. These were taken by Rankin, who is a prolific photographer, and very kindly has given us the rights to use these photos that he took of Dad in Cannes in 2016. There's a series of them, and I really love it. I just think he captured his essence. Okay, so there we go. So here are the boxes. When you can't even get a sense of the scale here from this picture, but these are the boxes when we moved them out of storage to bring them. At the time we brought them back to our house. They are, as I say, around 160. I'd say half of those are his personal library. So books that he was reading, books that inspired him, books that people sent him with notes on the inside. We're in the process of cataloging them, and we'll be sharing them on a platform called Libib, so that people can see, what was in his library. It's comprehensive, and it actually got to the point where he would order books on Amazon, and my mother would turn around and send them straight back without telling him that they had arrived. So I'm sure some of them, like so many of us, sat there on the shelf and didn't have a chance to be read, but they were certainly ones that he intended to. And then at the back of that picture, you can kind of see we have various objects, photos, awards, and medals and things. The first thing I'm going to share with you from it is, we'll give you a context, I think, of the madness within, but also the problems that we were up against as we put together this archive. I'm going to show you a page from his diary when he was 16. I'm not worried about anything confidential in it because I'm relatively confident that you will not be able to read it. Oh, no, I'm not. Sorry, that's Dad being knighted. Okay, here we go. That is a page from his diary. You can see by my husband's thumb there just how tiny the book is. It's about this big, and it is absolutely crammed in it. We have very high hopes to be working with AI on the archive, and I am told that AI is able to read hieroglyphics that's been buried under, lava or volcanic rock, for hundreds and hundreds of years. So I feel like in the next 20 years or so, they may be able to crack Dad's handwriting. He kept incredibly a diary every single year. So these ones when he was younger, and they are, I mean, if you can try and read it, they are things like woke up, had a coffee, spoke to mum, went and got lunch with a friend. They're not, at least I haven't got to the juicy stuff yet, if it's in there. And then later on, the older he gets, they turn more into just sort of meeting diaries and things like that. So yeah, there's a little flavor of the handwriting challenge that we have. So we have personal items like that. We have mind maps. We have a huge amount. This is for a TV series he was working on called The Creative Revolution. He has so many notes. We have notes from his PhD, we have book notes, we have business ideas, we have essays that he wrote at school. We have folders upon folders upon folders of notes. He really, and you know, things that were in typewriters. We have correspondences where he had to keep the carbon copy, and he kept the carbon copy. It's one of the things that archivists will tell you is so interesting to them is it's not just what they find in the collection, it's actually how it's stored. One of the tricky things that we have with our collection is that my parents had moved back to they were in LA for 20 years, and they had moved back to London in March 2020, just a few days before the first lockdown. And all of their belongings were in storage, and then Dad passed away in the August, so obviously, you know, a few months after they moved. But what that means is that the stuff isn't, some of it's sorted by him, which is what an archivist looks for, but a lot of it is packed by packers, without much rhyme or reason, sort of what would fit in a box where it would. But I think what's really remarkable about what the archive does tell you about him is just the foresight he had to keep everything, or the fact that he did keep everything, or maybe it tells you that he was a prolific hoarder. In any case, I'm very grateful. And what was, you know, clutter that drove my mother crazy for most of their marriage, it turns out now to be a collection of international significance. So is our win. So we have lots and lots of notes like this. And just for context, this is a mind map. Mind maps were sort of made famous by a man called Tony Bazan, and Dad was a huge fan of them. Hence this page of notes in mind maps. We have things from his childhood, like, you know, younger than 16 so this is a certificate that he got. You can't see there the year, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it was probably around 1960. He was a part of the infantile paralysis fellowship swimming group because he had polio from the age of 4, and spent 9 months in hospital as a child. He lost most of the muscle mass in both of his legs. Eventually, one was strong enough that he only needed a brace on one of his legs. But he every week would go swimming with other children who had either special educational needs or physical disabilities. And he's in there, and I couldn't find it to take a picture for this evening, but he was very pleased because he was given an award at the time in the 60s by Ken Dodd, who, if you don't know, is a comedian from Liverpool who Dad was a big fan of. So we have personal items like this, and then we have various awards and monuments. So this is a 5-foot sledgehammer. The man holding it is much stronger than he looks. I cannot lift it. It's solid, whatever that metal is. Arched on the side, it says, "For your voice, leadership, support in transforming the culture of education with a richer conception of human creativity and intelligence around the world, 2016. It was given to him by Big Picture Learning for his groundbreaking work in education, and shattering societal norms. And I just learned recently, because I was speaking to somebody who was also, you know, I guess they do this as an annual presentation. I spoke with somebody the other day who also happens to have a 5-foot sledgehammer in her possession. And I hadn't realized that the words are etched by students, Big Picture Learning students, which makes it more special. What we're in the process, before I get to, I've picked 3, which feels appropriate because Dad often broke things down into 3s. I have picked 3 items to go into more detail with you. I wanted to show you those quite quickly as an overview of the sort of scope of things that we have. We had an independent study done called a scoping survey by an archivist a few years ago, who deemed something like 46% of the collection had capacity to be the star item. She referred to it as a collection of international significance. We are in the process of sorting out the personal from the professional. You guys don't need to see my school reports or my Sweet 16 photos, which are all mixed in there as well. And we are, we're putting together the archive into proper archival industry standard cataloging and boxes. I'm really spending a huge amount of time on what the next steps for it will be. which may become clearer as I show you this next. I'm going to dive into the first item, if you're ready. Okay, this is a picture of it. Do not worry, I have the actual box here. So, as you will know, Dad was an incredible public speaker. One of the questions we get asked a lot was how much he prepared. You know, did he never had notes? He sometimes later on maybe would have a PowerPoint presentation, but people love, you know, say, particularly with the TED Talk, you know, did he memorize the entire thing and then sort of perform it, or how was it done? I am going to show you how it was done. So he would take a piece of A4 paper, he would fold it into 6 and rip it into these little note cards. So if you can see that there. On it, he would sort of map out a flow. So here, this was for the NBOA, Washington, DC, on the 22nd of February 2017. The presentation was called The Learning Revolution. And along here, he would map out some ideas, you know, the sort of the general flow of what it was that he was going to talk about. And then he would sort of, you know, this is then for point A, he would bulk out a bit more. Again, it's completely incomprehensible to the human eye. The handwriting is so shocking. He would do this, he would disappear for, you know, 5 minutes before he went on stage. He would do this. He would put it in his pocket, in his jacket, and never look at it. It was really just sort of to get his head straight, and then to, as a backup, I guess, in case he ever froze on stage, which obviously he never did. He would occasionally pull one out if he had a quote that he wanted to get right. And then what is remarkable is for every single talk he ever gave, and the earliest one I can find is 1975, for every single talk he gave, he would do this. In the earlier ones, there are note cards. In the later ones, they're that A4 piece of paper split into 6. And he would he would put them in boxes, sorted by year. And so we have the talk notes for every single talk he ever gave. So these are what you can see in the picture there, but these are a selection of the ones that range from 2002 to 2010. It's not exhaustive. There are boxes that also cover this time period. I'd say probably we have maybe 5 big bankers boxes full of things like this, and other ones scattered around. What's incredible about that is that we can, using AI in particular, we can look at how his work changed over the course of his career. So those early ones from 1975, when he was, I can't quite do the math in my head, but around, yeah, no, he would have been sort of just graduated from Bretton Hall. Maybe he was doing a PhD at the Institute of Education. You can kind of see how his earlier thoughts formed right the way up to the last talk that he did in 2020. So using AI, because as I say, the handwriting is incomprehensible, but also there's so much of it, it would take years for us to do it ourselves, but we can feed it in now to an AI system that will read that for us. What's equally remarkable about it is that we have all of the talk notes. We have, in most cases, the correspondence inviting him to go and do the talk notes, before that, the client call notes. And then often we have the video footage. So we have this really comprehensive arc of, you know, from start to finish on almost every talk that he ever gave. So as well as seeing how his work changed over that 50-year period, we can also see how his public speaking style changed. So there's a huge potential there, I feel, to do an incredible course on public speaking. From this box, I'll pause there for a second before I move on to the next one. But from this box, we have the TED Talk notes. So these were, if you can see, the notes that were in his pocket when he did the 2006 TED Talk. It follows the same format. You've got the event and the date up there. You've got the items. There's flow down here. So it says the future of creativity, A, intro, B, problem, C, creative intelligence, and D, conclusion. He's mapped out, I guess he wanted to spend 3 minutes on the first, 6 minutes, 6 minutes, and then 3 minutes. On the second page, it says intro. They will in a minute, which is that story he told about the little girl drawing a picture of God. B, 3 TED themes. C, want to bring them together. And then it goes on, and then my favorite bit is on one of the last pages. It just says Gillian Lynn, which is the story, obviously, yes, just here. Diverse, dynamic, distinct, and then that says there, Gillian Lynn. So that's the story of the girl who had to move to think, which is of everybody who gets in touch with us about that talk and the impact it had on them. That is the story that resonated the most with people we hear. And actually, you know, if he wasn't my dad, I'd have said the same to him, because my daughter Adeline, who was 6, is very much that little girl who has to move to think. So these were on stage with him in his pocket for people who then, you know, ask, did he write the entire thing out and then memorize it, which now if you do a TED talk, they make you do. But that was it. They actually, at the time, they didn't put the TED Talks online. He was one of the first 4 that they put online. And when they sent it to him to ask if he was comfortable with them putting it online in this trial, my mother's response was, yeah, it's okay, it's not your best. And I wish you'd worn a different shirt, she said. On the back of this, it has his TED wish, which I'm not sure if he ever said at the event or it wasn't in the video, but he said his TED wish was to identify, support, and promote creative approaches to education worldwide. So that is the first item, and a little insight into the things that we're able to do on the public speaking side, which is really exciting. The second item I found today, and I have tried to translate it for you, but apologies, I couldn't do it fully. I didn't have a huge amount of time, but I found it today while I was going through items. It is this piece of paper, which is from, it's in a folder. He spoke in 2009 at a conference with the Dalai Lama called the Vancouver Peace Summit. And in this folder that I found today, we have, you know, his talk notes and his prep for that event. I found this piece of paper, and I don't think it actually fits within. I think it may be misfiled on his end, but it's more him talking actually about writing a manifesto for education, which is what ultimately Imagine If, the book that I finished for him after he passed away, turned it to be. And I wish I had this piece of paper, but actually I was kind of reassured when I read it today that I think the book pretty much captures everything that's in this. I have translated it. I have tried. Here we go. So it says, what could I do 10 precepts, a manifesto on creative education with 100 words each, and what would they be? One of the things that we find really useful in the archive is that he wrote full sentences. So there's no random bullet points where you have to guess what he was thinking. Most of his notes are this coherent, where he writes the question out almost like a prompt to himself and then responds to the question, which makes our job much easier. So could I do 10 precepts, 100 words each? First, every human being child is a miracle. And then these are the 10 points. All born with innate natural competencies. Everyone is creative, have creative potential. Creativity is the process of having, and then he did ... but it's original ideas that have value, which is the definition that came out of his 1999 report, All Our Futures, the Robinson report. Imagination is a unique power of human consciousness. Intelligence is more than the brain, senses, mind. It is the senses, mind, and body. Facing unpredictable challenges, creativity is essential to all of them. I have no idea what the next one is, so yeah, I have no idea. And authenticity, something in authenticity, spirituality, authenticity, zone, energy. Finding your passion changes everything. So that's from The Element. Personal, cultural, economic points attached to each. Education public is not intended to promote creativity, industrialization. I don't know what the next one is. Education and timing, teaching specific skills and techniques. Mass education, linear, standardized, and another word I have no idea. Current forms of education are divisive. Need to promote creativity and be creative in doing that. The process of being creative, it's more and more complex and urgent. Well-being, inner harmony, personal with self, others, and the earth. The reason that I picked this, or when I found it today, I thought would be great to show to you guys. It raises a few points that I'm not sure. You know, he's very known for his work on creativity, particularly when it comes to education, but it talks here about spirituality. He wasn't a religious man, but he was, he would talk about your spirit, you know, what it is that puts you in good spirits or low spirits, and that's what he meant by spirituality. And the second is the earth, being in harmony with self, others, and the earth. And he was increasingly concerned in his later years to do with environmental well-being, and felt that we had a huge need, particularly when it comes to education, to instill values of environmental well-being into education. I love these notes that he wrote to himself. We have lots of them. I'm going to show you another one in a second, and then I will stop speaking this fast and furiously at you, and let Alex come back and we can have a chat. But I love them because they're sort of professional diary entries, and I don't think, certainly when I'm working, I don't have the kind of a presence of mind to write it in such a way. You can kind of really see him sitting down and writing to himself, and I wonder if that comes from all the years of writing diary entries, that he took the same approach when working on his professional development and the evolution of his. He hated when people said his theories, because he would say these are not theories, they work. We know that they work, they're working all around the world, but so not his theories, but the evolution and development of his principles and his work. And then the last thing I'd like to show you, I found when I was working on the manifesto, and again, I have translated it for you. It says, why am I so engaged in the effort to transform education? You'll see the red strike throughs. He had his own little system that I am yet to crack for what those meant. Sometimes it would mean that he had, when he was writing, he would strike through in green, and that would mean he'd moved it to somewhere else. Or if it was blue, it would mean it needed breaking down more. Or I'm not sure why it's on this page. So he said, why am I so engaged in the effort to transform education? I think the heart of this is that, one, I recognize the diversity of people's talents, interests, and aspiration. Two, I believe in the right to a self-determination and personal fulfillment. A good education is a basic human right and entitlement. Three, I believe in the freedom of the individual to live a life of purpose and meaning within a framework and aspire for others to do the same. Four, I believe that a vibrant, healthy society depends on a huge variety of talent and interest, and that it is in our common interest to cultivate them. Five, I know that dominant forms of academic education inherently marginalize and stigmatize other interests and abilities. They don't have to, but they do. Six, when kids find what they're good at, they get better at everything, schooling, and therefore it needs to be balanced across and between and within. Seven, the current form of industrial education, i.e. age-dependent, test-driven, is militantly against the balanced, holistic, individual form of education that all children need. Eight, the failures of these systems have toxic consequences for society as a whole. And nine, education is liberative of the individual. Anthony, my husband, and I, we run a workshop based on this, because I think what's incredible about it is, he would have written this when he was working on the manifesto, so he would have written this around 2017. I think part of it was to inspire himself, and the purpose of why it was that he was writing the book. But I think it's pretty incredible to have, and one of the things that we love to do is to run workshops to help educators create their own version of it, so create their own personal manifesto for why it is that they're involved in doing the things that they're doing. And if you are here because you're planning to start a school, it could be a great thing to start with, to write to challenge yourself to answer the question, why are you so engaged in the work that you do? Those are the items that I have brought to show you. I just quickly, before Alex, I'm going to ask you to come back. One of the things that I'm really excited about to do with this, which I'm excited to share with you, is as we have such a comprehensive collection, as so much of it, there's all this stuff which I just love. It's like sort of sitting with him when you go through the boxes. But we also have an amazing opportunity, I think, to create a pedagogy. So in the same way that you can, follow Montessori or Steiner, you could, in theory, have a Robinson pedagogy that you could become a practitioner in, or you could create a school based around. And so we're partnering with various education research departments at various universities to work together to create a Robinson pedagogy, and I think, you know, he never wanted to start a school himself. I think he felt like he didn't have the capacity to do the work that he was doing and give that the love and attention that he needed. But I think he would have really loved the idea that people around the world were able to take his work, not theories, his methods, and implement them in a creative strategy for education. I think that's it. Yeah, thank you. If you would like to stay up to date, we have a membership platform called the Creative Revolution, where we share updates regularly about the stuff that we find in the archive, and it's also an incredible community of people who are inspired by Dad, and there are some members here this evening. So hi guys. But yes, please do get in touch as well if you'd like to learn more.
That's amazing, Kate. Thank you so much. What a unique way to share your dad's work. I love it.
It's a lot, huh? I was like, that's a lot to chuck into half an hour.
Absolutely. And like must be such a challenge to pick out which bits to share as well, because if there's so much.
Well, there's so much, and there's these dense folders, you know, which I think, you know, we have all the notes, say, on all our futures, the report he did in 99, and the correspondence and the ways to make it happen. But that, you know, that's several hours worth of sitting and talking.
Maybe a
Oh, I
future.
can stop sharing my screen now, can't I?
Oh yes,
So,
yeah,
there we go.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. And actually, the last piece you shared, oh, I don't know, there was something about that. It started to make I get that feeling sometimes, maybe the feeling I was talking about at the beginning. And there's something about that. I really hope, yeah, people can take that away. And I'll definitely be watching that bit again. Because I wrote down education is liberative of the individual. I think that's
Isn't that beautiful?
so amazing. Yeah.
Do you know, we have, when I was going through the through his work for to finish the book, I started sort of frantically highlighting because he had this incredible way with words, even when he was writing. What was my favorite one? One of them, I'm going to butcher it. Let me see if I can do it justice. In Out of Our Minds, he said something like, "The impossible yesterday is routine today. Wait until tomorrow." Which,
Oh,
how did you write? How did you do that?
mm,
Yeah, it was incredible.
yeah, so true.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Awesome. I'm so glad that we got to share in that this evening. So now
Mhm.
I get to ask you lots of questions about your
Please do.
dad and your work as well and what you're doing. So if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question of Kate, please do pop them in the chat. We'll be picking out questions as we go. So anything you like, have a little write in the chat and we'll ask them on your behalf. But the question I've been burning to ask, Kate, is when you obviously you grew up around your dad and all of the work that he was doing, did you follow his work before he died? Was it something that you were like passionate about as well, or was it something that when he died you were like, no, actually it's my time to step in now?
That's a great question. So my husband and Anthony and I, we started a company 5 years before Dad passed away, to work with him. So we were essentially his head office for the last 5 years. So we worked very closely with him. Before that, I had helped him on Finding Your Element, the follow-up to the Element book, and sort of, you know, spent summers working as a research assistant in his office. But so yes, we did work with him. So it was a natural thing to say, okay, we're going to continue this. It really struck me when he was dying that because we had this very intense 18 days, you know, from diagnosis to or prognosis to passing away, that you couldn't separate him out from the work, and that actually the best way to honor him was to continue the work, you know, because he lived and breathed it. And so one of the reasons why I was so passionate, or I am so passionate about it, is that I grew up in a house where Dad worked very closely with my mum. She was his manager, but you know, eventually, but they, you know, she was a teacher, and they were passionate about this together. And it was the topic of conversation at the dinner table. You know, car journeys. I would wake up and I could hear them. You know, Dad would be shaving in the bathroom, and she'd be sort of leaning against the radiator, and they'd be talking about it then, and I could hear it through my bedroom wall from any age. So I think there's a process of osmosis. Certainly, you know,
couldn't help but be involved.
no, there were no working hours, there were no weekends.
Yeah.
It was pretty, yeah, 24/7 creativity in education.
I think that's the definition of being in your element, really, isn't it?
100%, yes. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Okay, I'm going to dive into questions, and I shall hold back from my own questions myself. But
Okay.
Daisy says in the chat that she'd love to hear your reflections about your own education and what it looked like.
Ooh, yeah. Yes. What do you know? What's funny is I am, you know, like so many people, the kid that Dad was talking about. I don't mean I was specifically the kid he was talking about. He was talking about a long time before I came along, but um, the system didn't work for me. It turns out I found out in June of this year, and I'm 35 years old. I found out that I have ADHD, which is a shock to nobody except for me.
Always the way.
Yeah, no, it makes everything make sense.
Yeah.
um, but you know, the system isn't, certainly it possibly more so now, it certainly was not then set up to cater to any kind of neurodiversity. I don't think people were saying neurodiversity. You know, ADHD when I was a kid was ADD, and I wasn't hyperactive, physically, mentally, massively, but you know, and people thought it was just for boys. We moved to America when I was 12, and I went to what looked like a really fantastic school. You know, it had an amazing dance studio and theatre group and art facilities. And we found this actually with looking for schools for my daughter, not the one she's at now, but other ones, that schools will often talk a very good game from the outside, but actually what they do on the inside is quite different. And so this school was great for my brother, who is very academic. But for me, it was torture. And I think combined with, you know, hormones, which aren't great for ADHD, and big life changes, I really struggled with it. So when I was 16, I left school with my parents' support. They said, you know, if you were in England, you could leave school and it's not your fault, you're not in England. So we didn't know it at the time because it wasn't a phrase that was sort of used so often, but we unschooled, we would call it now. And I had a system, you know, I had to do something. We sat down, we sat down as a family, and I have somewhere, not on me, but I have somewhere the notes that I took. So I was not allowed to have a baby at 16. Which is what I really wanted to do. I was not allowed to run away with the circus. And I was not allowed to spend all day, every day in bed. So what I did was I did internships, and I was, you know, very fortunate that my parents' friends opened their doors, and I went and did. I was also fortunate that I didn't, you know, I had parents who were able to support me financially, so I did free internships and paid internships and courses and community college, and yeah, my life started when I left school. So,
Gosh,
yeah,
that's got more power, that sentence, than you
yeah,
think. Like,
it's common as well, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. I was
Yeah.
saying just in the session earlier today, like I got to the end of my education and I feel like I didn't actually know who I was or what I wanted or what I
Yeah.
enjoyed, and I suddenly had to go and find that for myself, and it wasn't what I'd learned at school. So, yeah,
No.
very
No,
interesting.
I think that's what so much of sort of why the 20s have become a continuation of the teen years in lots of ways, right?
Mm,
Because you need that time to figure out, you know, if you've got the luxury of being able to, but even if you haven't, you sort of end up doing it in amongst everything else, figuring out who you are, and
mm,
um yeah, figuring
yeah,
life out in, I would say, in spite of your education, not because of it.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
What was your dad's educational experience like? Do you know? Because it
I
must
do.
have been affected by his disability.
Hmm. It was. So he went to a school called the Margaret Bevans School in Liverpool, which was a school for kids with special needs.
Mm.
Um, Special educational needs, but also physical disabilities. And so he used to joke that it was like the canteen in Star Wars when you walked in, that everybody sort of looked different and, you know, and behaved differently. Um, but I think he made some incredible friends through it. You know, a lot of them had polio because it was the 1950s and there had just been an epidemic. But then he had, you know, children who had Down syndrome or cerebral palsy in and amongst it. He was chosen, a sort of a kindly benefactor called Charles Stafford came in one day and took a liking to him, and put him forward to do the 11 plus, which he passed. and he went to go to the local grammar school. And to get to the local grammar school, so for context, Dad was born into intense poverty in, you know, one of the areas of highest deprivation in Liverpool, just by, it's called Speller Lane, by Everton football field. Oh God, my family would kill me. I think it's Goodison Park, Everton, isn't it? Or is that Liverpool? I think it's Goodison Park. Please don't kill me. I'm sure it is. I should have stuck with Everton. But he had to walk from there to school, and it was something like 3 buses, and then his classroom was at the top of the stairs. And he had like the calipers that they wear in Forrest Gump. We have them in the archive. They weigh a ton. These solid metal frames on his leg, and they would make him bleed from all the walking. And he shared a room with 2 of his brothers because there were 7 of them in total. And you know, one of his brothers saw his legs, and he was like, "Don't tell mum, don't tell mum." And my uncle took great pleasure in telling his mum because that was their dynamic. And so we had to leave that school because she was like, we can't have you bleeding because of. But he loved school, you know. And I think a lot of his family, it was expected that they would do manual labor, they would work on the docks. A few of them went to play for Everton, but Dad was supposed to be the great footballer of the family before he got polio, and so his dad told him to work on his education. So he did, and then there's actually a brilliant BBC radio show called The Educators, where I forget who it was who interviewed him, but they take him back to the site of his earlier schools and interview him in that setting. So he tells all this story then. He went to Bretton Hall at Leeds University to study drama and education, and then he did his PhD at the Institute of Education. So he loved it. I mean, he was an academic at his heart. You know, he loved universities and school. And what's so incredible is actually none of his work came from a fiery passion because he felt let down by the system. He kind of came through the system all the better for it.
That's so interesting. And it goes to show, like, one of the things we've been talking about this summit is that the important thing we're talking about is the care and the care for individual children, but also giving them choice. Like, you need to choose what's best for you and for your children, your family. And sometimes that can look like the schooling system that we have, like, but just for so many it doesn't. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I've got more questions coming in on the chat, so let's have a look. Maria asks, do you know what your dad's thoughts were and opinions were about tests, standardized tests?
Yes. Yes, I do. He felt like assessment is a very important part of education, but assessment can take many forms. You know, assessment being literally just assessing how people are doing. He absolutely loathed and detested high stakes standardized testing and multiple choice, and you know, those little things that you feed into the machine. You know, his point was that there are all sorts of ways that you can personalize assessment and keep it at the heart and involve young people in the process of assessing their own work. But standardized tests and tests that are really there sort of to showcase either how the school is performing or to use it as a form of competition for entrance and things, he was pretty solidly against.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about that earlier today actually as well, is that this competition element is just it's not how you foster the individual sort of passions within children, is it? So yeah.
No, absolutely not.
And then okay, we've got so I'm just trying to work through some of the questions. Someone's gone and asked, is it Yosef? So Yosef asks, Kate, this is one for you. Have you found your element?
I think so. I think I have more than one element, and I think that's possibly something that I would actually love to. I've been talking to my mother and the Veronica, who co-wrote the element, about redoing the element. I think Dad would have by this point if he was still alive. I love doing this. I love speaking to people, and I think that's probably when I'm the most relaxed and in my element. I also love writing, but under very specific circumstances.
Okay.
Usually 3 days after a deadline ordinarily, and I can't write after noon, and it has to be, you know, I have loud shouty music in my ears. Um, and I love to craft and embroider. But I think for the most part, it's speaking and writing I enjoy doing.
Amazing.
But I
Yeah.
think it changes. I think your element, sorry to interrupt, I think your element changes throughout your life. You know, I think the
Mm,
idea of finding an element
mm,
is an oversimplification. You
mm,
know, it changes as you change, doesn't it?
mm. Yeah, and you can have more than one, which is what you
Yeah.
just said, like you can find a number of things. And in fact, I almost sort of see like the perfect life or the is a combination of elements. It's kind of like finding all these things that you love and then
Mm.
finding a way to combine them. Yeah,
Yeah,
and bringing them
exactly.
together. Mm.
Yeah, exactly.
Mark asks in the chat, that how do you move yourself from play to passion to purpose? So I suppose it's sort of starting with how do you like take something that you just enjoy and then turn
Mm.
it into something that you're actually doing something about, you're taking action on and finding purpose in.
It's a very good question. I think that's probably going to be different for everybody, not to give a very wishy-washy answer. And what it is that you're playing with. I think play is such an important um, part of the element and a massive part of being human. And it's something that, it changes as you get older. I read this recently from a parenting perspective that even, you playing with your children is so important, but your brain changes so that even as an adult, for the most part, most adults, when they're playing at playing, they're pretending to play, but they're not playing the way that kids play because your brain has changed at that point. You kind of lose the capacity for true play. But what you end up being able to do is playing around with other aspects, whether it's art or creating something or business or working or whatever it is that you want to find the play in. I think finding a higher purpose beyond yourself. And I remember talking to my parents about that. It was in the context of they've been married for 40 years when my dad passed away, and happily, deeply and
Mm,
profoundly married. But they were very different people, my parents. And I remember asking, what the secret was to marriage, and they said you have to you have to find something that's bigger than you are. And for them, it was this. It was talking about, transforming education. Um, I think finding that meaning behind what you're doing. So taking it, and also, not having any pressure to go from playing into doing something deeply profound. There's a time and a place for both things.
mm,
Um, a dad would also say to get out and make sure that you find the people who are doing, if you find something that you love to do and you're enjoying it and you want to take it up to the next level, is go and find people who are a few steps ahead of you on the road.
mm.
And then eventually, once you get further down, turn around and find the people who are a few steps behind you and help them along the path as well.
Oh, that's such a beautiful way of putting it. I feel like
Mm.
that sums up this event really well. Like it's one of the things, and it's one of the reasons I do the podcast is like bringing these
Yeah.
people in there and going, okay, these people are doing really cool stuff, but actually, you can be on this path too. Like this is
Yeah.
how do you get there?
Yeah, exactly.
Inspiring them
Um,
to do that.
yeah, and mentoring is a huge part of it.
Mm,
Dad would say that, he only was who he was because he stood on the shoulders of giants. He would say none of what he did was new, none of his concepts, not theories, concepts were new. He was standing on the shoulders of giants.
yeah, amazing. Oh, I've got a great question from Debbie in the chat.
Okay.
So Debbie asks, can you summarize what the Robinson pedagogy would look like?
No. No, I can't, Debbie. No, I'm not withholding. I promise. We just haven't got to that point with it yet. I would love it to be so. Like I said, if you can go into a Steiner school or you can become a Steiner practitioner. I would love it to be something that is so concise like that, so you could walk into a setting and know that you're in a Robinson setting. But it wouldn't have to just be Robinson. You could go into a Steiner school that had Robinson elements of it. A huge amount of learning through play. Actually, to be fair, a lot of it is an imaginative. A huge amount of learning through play. I imagine, and again, this is hypotheses because we haven't done the research into it yet, and tested it and trialed it and peer reviewed it. But I imagine it will be cross interdisciplinary, cross age groups. There will be a lot of nature involved. Um, and a lot of student voice and real life
Mm,
learning. He had the 8 C's. oh God, I can feel myself trying to attempt them. I haven't for a long time. I'm going to moonwalk out of that. But no, he had the 8 C's, which are in Imagine, creativity, collaboration, compassion, um, citizenship, to name a few. I'm excited to find out exactly what all parts of it are, and I think the secret to it will be in the archive. But there are definitely little hints of it. He talked a lot about ecosystems and schools being ecosystems and valuing diversity of talents and interests and passions. And I think the ultimate Robinson pedagogy would be one that inspires a healthy ecosystem, whatever that ecosystem looks like, because it'll be different. It'll be different in every school, and every school is different. Every part of the world is different, and has different needs.
Do you think that's something that is possible? Because it feels like over, like, education feels like it's been trying to get more standardized over time. That's what it feels like to me. I don't know if that's true for everyone else. And so where we used to, before the national curriculum, we had schools that were just providing education, and people had more freedom in what they delivered, which may or may not have turned out well, depending on which school you went to and which teachers you had. And then national curriculum brought in this sort of, so everyone's going to learn roughly the same sorts of things. And now I look at what my daughter was learning at school, and I was like, I think that's the same stuff that I learned 20, 30 years ago. And I'm just like, surely there's like something else that kids need to be learning right now.
Yeah,
Um,
you'd think.
so given this sort of this move towards like more standardization, how do we move from there to something which actually looks not standardized?
For answer that, Penny Hay has very helpfully put the 8 C's. Thank you, Penny, for coming to my rescue
You,
in the chat. Alliteration is wonderful, but very confusing when it comes to memory. You can't do like a never eat shredded wheat thing when everything is C, can you? Yeah, I think you're right. I think actually, and I being ever an optimist, I like to think that the reason that we are increasingly standardized is not because, I've often said I don't think people wake up and think, how can I screw kids over today? How can I wake up and make the education system a place kids do not want to be? I think a lot of it is an attempt to be fair, isn't it? The great equalizer. If everybody has the exact same standard and the exact same classes, we can quality control it and we can make sure that they're all at the right level. But it doesn't take into consideration the fact that nobody's brain is standard, and kids develop at different levels, and they all have different stages, and they all have different life situations and circumstances. It takes the people out of it. And I think that's the antidote as well, isn't it? Is putting the humanity back into it, is recognizing that kids are people first and foremost, and that so my daughter goes to a really lovely school, and I'm always very keen to say it's an independent school. It's incredibly well resourced, and so a lot of what they do would be trickier for other schools to do. But I think this one applies to everything. We had our first parent teacher meeting in the second week of school, the third week, and it's called the You Tell Us meeting, where you go and you tell the teacher about your kid. And so we were talking to her about it, and she's, how it's going. And she said she was spending these first 3 weeks just getting to know the kids in her class before they did anything, so they were studying themselves and each other and doing, and so she said, because then I can, once I know who they are, I can support them through everything else that it is that we're going to be doing. And I don't see any reason why that can't happen. I know, the class sizes can be huge across different schools, and there's so much else that teachers have to do. There's so much else that gets put on them. But it's one of those stitch in time saves nine thing, isn't it? When you take the time to figure out the people that you have in your class, and what's going on with their parents, and they're the kind of kids that would have breakfast before they come to school, or first and foremost, then you can start to tailor everything that is that they need to learn based on how they learn and who they learn, and also empowering kids with how to recognize themselves, how they learn, not forever, but maybe this week. I went to go visit a school in California, and they, from the very early years up, they have a little chart where you can put your name in different slots, and it's, today I'd like to work on my own, or in a small group, or in a big group, or I'd like to work one, with a teacher, and that kind of stuff. That's the stuff, right? If we had access to that kind of self-awareness from an early age, and to how to trust yourself, we wouldn't spend our 20s trying to figure out who the hell we are. Oh,
Mm.
we might, but we'd be more used to the concept.
We know
We'd
what we were
acknowledge that's a
doing.
part of life. Yeah, exactly. Like, oh yeah, that's just life, isn't it? Figuring out who I am. Um,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And actually, you've given a few practical examples there. Like I feel I'm not a teacher, but I feel like those would be quite easy to bring into your classroom.
Yeah.
And even, I mean, I'm also thinking from my perspective as a parent as well. This is the sort of stuff I spend a lot of my time, much to my daughter's annoyance sometimes, trying to work out how she thinks and
Yeah.
like what she likes. And I think sometimes she's just like, oh, just
Just let me be. Yeah.
um, but yeah, like bringing that sense of actually, I'm trying to understand you as an individual, as a person,
Yeah.
and what you like and what you do is really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, and that's, that we put a lot on schools, don't we? But you can't underestimate the role as a parent that you
Mm,
have in, I did a talk a few years ago, and at the end I said, don't trust the system more than you trust your kid. Listen when your kid speaks to you. Don't The system isn't designed for them. It's designed for kids, but it's not designed for your kids specifically. It couldn't be. There's no way for a mass system to be designed for the individual. Um, but we delegate a lot. I think a lot of people get to school aged with their kids and chuck them in school and think, "Oh, at least that's one thing off my to-do list," because we have so much else
mm,
on, right? Like we aren't raising kids in villages the way that we used to, and there's a huge amount of pressure on
mm,
to work and to keep a house and to do all of it. And so you like to think, okay, school can take care of that part of raising my kid, but you can't ask them to do absolutely everything.
mm,
You can't delegate that aspect of it.
mm,
And actually, it's been kind of eye-opening being a parent. Everything. I have a 10-year-old stepson. My daughter's 6, and then we have a little baby who is 16 months. And um, it's one of those things. Everything I thought I knew, all my years of nannying and working in schools and the childhood psychology I studied, meant nothing when I had an actual child, who hadn't read the textbooks, didn't know they were supposed to behave in a
Damage.
certain way. Yeah. Um, but what's been really eye-opening is actually, I find certainly in the schools that we've been privileged enough to go to, teachers are wonderful and they're there because it's a vocation, and systems are what they are. But we have found a huge hurdle as parents,
Mm,
and their expectations of what, even at this really lovely progressive school that Adeline goes to, we have parents that are panicking that, I had a conversation with a friend who was like, it's not on. She doesn't know number bonds to 10. And I was like, she's 5. It's like, but she should know her number bonds to 10. I was like, why? And she's like, I don't know. I was like, she will. Like, she will figure out that 7 plus 3 is 10 without having to think about it. But, if we were in Denmark, they wouldn't start school for another 2 years. What difference does it make at
mm,
this point? And a lot of it is, I think a lot of the added pressure that teachers have is parent pressure.
mm. Yeah, so that's interesting. So,
Mm.
a question I was going to ask is like, as as teachers, getting to know children in the classroom, making space for play is really important.
Hmm.
But as parents, what can we do? And that's like, that's a great way to think of it, is kind of
Yeah.
take the foot off the gas pedal, I suppose.
Yeah, let your kids be kids, because they're also, they're looking at you all the time. And if you start panicking that they're not reading chapter books by the end of year 1, they're going
Mm,
to start stressing about it,
yeah,
and that's not conducive for learning, is it?
exactly.
Panicking about what people are going to think of you, certainly your parents.
Mm. How did
Yeah.
how did your dad's views on education change throughout his life?
Um, I will know more about that once we've done that AI piece of sort of
Mm,
scoping the archive. I think what's interesting, I found a note today from a talk he gave in the 90s, and he talks about the 4 purposes of education, and they're exactly the same as the ones that we have in Imagine If.
mm,
Um, and so actually there are some sort of stalwart ideas that he had that stayed the same throughout. And then I think, the more he traveled, the more he saw schools and things that they were doing, the more that he could tailor it. I'm sure he added in things like citizenship and things a bit later, I would imagine. And then certainly in the final few years, this idea of the environment was incredibly important to him. And I think having met my mother, that's where the spiritual piece came, and the mindfulness, and all of those aspects of it.
Because
But he
didn't he?
started out, he was very passionate about drama and education. That's where this all came from, was theatre.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where the creative element, I suppose, came from as
Yeah.
well. Yeah. Didn't he, because just before I remember seeing a video that he launched I think a few months before he died, where he was starting up there was a sort of new movement around the environment stuff, wasn't there? What was
He did something called the Call to Unite. Was it that video that he did
Yeah,
in COVID? And he talked about the environment a lot in that talk. He'd been working on a platform called Boundless, before he died, with a man called Ted Smith. He did a movie called Most Likely to Succeed, and Boundless has kind of been. Ted now has his own sort of version of it called What School Could Be, that's very American focused, and then we have, inspired by Boundless, the Creative Revolution, which is our creative community. But yeah, I think part of he was sort of acutely aware, particularly as he got older, of diary notes of him saying, he thought he had 5 more years of physical mobility before he was kind of resigned to the fact that, the polio got much worse as he got older. He never used to have a stick, and then he walked with a stick. And I think he kind of, once he hit his late 60s, he kind of felt he wrote, I've got 5 years left to be this mobile and to be traveling the world and speaking. So a lot of his later years were spent very much thinking about how his work would continue when it wasn't dependent. It was also dependent on him, how it could continue. And I think Boundless and the Creative Revolution, or What School Could Be, have come from really this recognition that he had, that his work and the work of so many others had inspired this huge movement around the world, and actually the best way to continue it was to harness and bring those people together. To sort of really pull together the grassroots revolution.
Yeah, we were talking yesterday actually about bringing people together and how important that is. And it's one of the things, obviously events like this are fantastic because you get so many people together and chatting in the groups, and we get the networking session where people can chat at the end, and that's one of the reasons that Joe and I have launched this community. But there's something about finding people, as you say, to kind of work with, that kind of, it's like you get more fire when you get a bunch of you together, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's what he was so great. His work was so great. That TED talk, like you said, it lit all these sort of this fire in your brain. I think what was so great, and about all of his talks, just that's the one that most people have seen, was that it made people feel like they weren't alone. That it wasn't just them who was struggling, or their kid who was struggling. It was possibly a fault with something bigger than the system, but also that if they felt like this, and there was this complete stranger basically saying, putting words to their feelings, and there would be other people who felt the same way. And it turns out, at this point, there were nearly 78 million views, I think, so far of the TED talk, so it hit a nerve. It resonated.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, I'm going to go back to a couple of questions in the chat. So, Becky in the chat says, alternative education routes feel under constant threat from policymakers and authorities that don't subscribe to a different way to learn, to sort of standard. How do we protect these options?
It's very true. It's massively true. There was the whole threat to homeschooling in the past few years. There's the VAT on independent schools, which some schools can absolutely handle, and then there are all the small, as you and Joe know, all the small independent schools, that have got kids full of kids who don't fit in, who maybe tried the traditional or the mainstream systems education and have gone elsewhere, massively in trouble with that at the moment. I don't know is the answer. I think I don't know. And it's where I think Dad had got, he did that report, All Our Futures, in 1999, and got so frustrated. Actually, I found the correspondence. The government swept it under the rug, and I found a very angry letter about how, to David Blunkett from Dad, saying, I'm bitterly disappointed that you've decided not to, to circulate this report. And I think that for him was about, he spent all this time and energy on this report that the Labour government commissioned on creating a creative strategy in education that then just got ignored by the government, but not by the sector, that lit a fire in the sector. And so that's why he moved the grassroots revolution away from politics. I wish I knew, because I think what feels incredibly scary at the moment is that power changes so easily. And whether you elected the people who are in power or not, they have this capacity to completely upend your life, and they're not thinking. Certainly, I know there are some people in the Labour Party who would be adamantly against independent schools completely, and have this image of them all being like Eton, which they're just not. And fundamentally, parents and educators, have got a right here to choose how they educate their kids. My only answer, I suppose, aside from I don't know, which is probably the most honest answer I can give, is that we just have to be as loud as we humanly can. Just keep shouting, and we have the evidence. We have it every day in the kids, and we can collect it and make it presentable, and keep just don't give in. Rage against the machine.
Prove that it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone else in there, let me just find who it was. So someone else asked in the chat Penny, who kindly put the 8 C's in for us.
Yeah.
She asked if you've put in a response to the curriculum and assessment review that's currently out at the moment.
No, I have not, but I am in a few fair number of groups that are sort of working on putting them in together. I'm very inclined just to put in all our futures. That's there's a whole, actually I have it here. There's a whole my manifesto notebook, and I have here to help me open upside down. I have here the annex from All Our Futures, which has Objective 1, curriculum and assessment, to ensure the importance of creative and cultural education is explicitly recognised and provided for in schools policies for the whole curriculum and in government policy for the national curriculum. And it's a huge actionable to-do list for creativity. The whole report is, but this is the sort of the Cliff Notes version of it. And I am very inclined just to send this in, because I think it's your government who did it, and we know. And I'm disheartened by the curriculum review, if I'm being totally honest. I think it's very focused on assessment still. It seems to have gone in with the decision made. I don't feel like it's gone in very, at least the literature I've read in it doesn't feel particularly open-minded. It feels very, for anybody who's not in the UK, by the way, this is the Labour government is doing a curriculum review into the UK curriculum, and so people have been asked to submit insights and recommendations. And yeah, I feel disheartened by it already, but I know people who don't, so I'm trying to cling to that. There isn't anybody who specifically focuses on creativity on it, which is concerning. But yeah, I am inclined just to send them a rather passive aggressive copy of Out of Our Minds. Just read this.
Yes, every little helps. I think it's one of those things that what feels to me is something that it's a bit like voting. Like, you might feel like your vote is going nowhere, but without it, it's at least a chance. Like, it's
what we can do.
It's a place your voice is heard.
But Penny's put it here in the chat: 54 questions and not one on arts and creativity in the review. You think these are supposed to be, this is as close to a government on our side as we're going to get, and actually so far it's it feels so counter what I would have hoped it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, so moving on to hopefully something a bit more sort of optimistic about.
Optimistic.
What do you think is the one thing, if you were going to give one piece of advice, we wanted to go and bring more creativity and imagination into the education system today, what would be your one piece of advice?
My one piece of advice, I think, would be to give children space. I don't think creativity is something that we can encourage in children. It's something that we can support in children, but particularly in the early years, I do not think it is anything that we have to map out and explain to children. It's so at the core of what it is to be a child, and I think I would give children space, and even in the older years, to think and to feel and to be, and to if we think of creativity as being the process of having original ideas that have value, you can apply that to everything. It doesn't mean that every kid's going to walk out a sculptor or a painter or a dancer. what's incredible, and we've been seeing this certainly with Gen Z and now Gen Alpha, is we have these generations of kids who are increasingly aware, self-aware, aware of the world, and it's probably the access to the 24-hour news cycle that they have, that no other generations before them have had. Um, but I think it's such a mistake that we make to think that knowledge is one-sided, and that the only way that education happens is if an adult is giving it to a child. And I think creating opportunities for just nothingness, is probably the easiest way there is, possibly also the scariest way.
Yeah.
But I think the easiest way there is to let creativity grow, because it's, the natural, Dad wrote on one of the things, so the natural default of life is to live, and the natural default for humans is to create. You just got to let it, in the sense that you see sort of grass growing between slabs of concrete, right? Like where there is capacity for life, there will be life. And at the moment, that's where all these little branches of creativity are coming from, really, are between the slabs of concrete of education, and cracking those wider and just providing empty spaces.
Wow, that's a really beautiful analogy. And you're right, it is scary. No, I've I find that scary enough with my daughter.
Yeah.
I remember when she started primary school, and there was this thing, and I don't know if it's still about, because I haven't been doing it with her, but there was this thing that, like, they start school and then you have to start them in all these after school clubs. I don't know if that's a thing still. And so I was like looking
Yes,
around,
it
like,
is.
right, what's she going to do? She's going to go to gymnastics. She's going to do swimming. She's doing like a drama class, and all of her evenings, well, not all of them, but we did a few sessions after school. And very quickly, she told me, through her behavior rather than her words, mind you,
Yeah.
that this wasn't
It's too
working
much.
for her. And so we stopped
Yeah.
it all. But the fear of, like, I was like, but what if she never
Yeah.
finds this thing that she wants to do with
Yeah.
her life,
Yeah.
It's
What if we've missed the opportunity for the
yeah,
Olympics?
yeah, oh,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, what if
No,
she's
I
going to
get
be a
it.
professional gymnast and I've taken that
Yeah.
chance away from her.
I get it. That's I have that with Adeline, my 6-year-old. We homeschooled as well last year before we found this really beautiful school that she's at. And um all of last year I resisted doing anything after school, because I thought she's not been in school for a year, and she's little. She was 5. Um so I think being at school from 8:30 to 3:30 is enough is enough at that age. And then increasingly we've sort of started to slowly but surely add some little bits in, but that's more because she bounces off the walls. She is that kid that has to move to think, and so giving her opportunity to do that beyond what we can do in a flat in London seems helpful to her. But I'm with you. We seem to think that unless our kids are incredibly gifted at something, or on the route to the Olympics, or to something by the age of 7, that we failed somehow. And actually, I think the best gift we can give our kids is a childhood, right? Like a proper childhood, just to play. So it's all, because when do you ever get that chance again? Really, to that extent, where you really, we talked before about sort of adult ways to play, but that way of just sort of getting lost in your own head. Dad talked about, and it's in Imagine If, this idea that we all exist within 2 worlds: the world around us, which is a physical world that we share, it's here whether or not you're in it, and then the world of your inner world, your thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and that came to being only because you're here, and that ends when you end, depending on what your belief system is. And that in the West we make such a big distinction between these two. We tend to ignore the second one in education entirely, but actually they're so interconnected, because the way you view the world around you is informed by who you are on the inside, and who you are on the inside is shaped by your experiences of the world around you. And it's through, again, those spaces, the cracks in the concrete, the empty moments, the free play, that kids figure out that world grows. Otherwise, I one of the scariest things as a parent, right, is that I've been trying to incorporate is creating those opportunities for failure, or to pick themselves up, or to resist the urge to give them the phone at the dinner table, or on long car journeys because they're bored, and think really, actually, aside from sort of making your life a bit easier, what you're doing is sending them the message that they can't be bored. You know, it's not okay for them to be bored or to moan or to whine or but it feels, you know, and our default, isn't it, is to be proactive. You want to constantly be proactive and know that that you're doing something. But actually, yeah, not doing anything is the scary and very effective way. I say this, as I said, you know, cards on the table, trying to figure parenting out is very different from talking about parenting. You know, and it doesn't take into consideration who you are as a person as well, and how, you know, what your day's been like and how much you slept the night before and how much you just need 5 minutes peace.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard.
It is. And
Yeah.
like, I'm also thinking about teachers or people in education settings who are thinking, yes, this is something I want to do. This is something that feels important, is to give the you know, the students or the young people in my class more space. But how do I do that within the confines of the place I'm working in, the curriculum, everything I have to sort of get done, you know?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts about that? Like, have you worked with teachers on how they can bring this sort of space into their classrooms?
We do, yeah. We do. So we run a fair amount of workshops. And I find often what we find with teachers is you're not telling them anything they don't know. You know, and it's like I said, teaching's a vocation. It's something people do because they feel called to it and they love it. And often it runs in families. It runs in my family. And it's, you know, it's often actually talking to senior leadership teams at schools to say you know, just let teachers do their thing. And again, also to parents, because you know, teachers can create the space and then parents panic and say, well, what was this 15 minutes not allocated for? So it is that ecosystem that Dad talked about. It's every piece has to be thriving in order for the whole of it to work.
Yeah, it's so true. Okay, I've got another question from the audience. Nimrod asks, and it's actually very similar to what I've just asked, but how do you see the role of creativity in modern education? And what strategies have you seen schools implement to foster a more creative and dynamic learning environment?
I think, again, if we take the definition of creativity being the process of having original ideas that have value, it's very often seen through the arts, right? But it's not exclusive to the arts. The arts are an incredible way to encourage creativity, but you can be creative in absolutely everything and are creative. You know, some of the world's best accountants are very creative in their accounting. So I think, you know, and that's possibly where with all our futures, you know, the government struggled because they thought Dad was going to say, or the committee was going to say, you know, put an hour of creativity on a Friday afternoon and we'll be fine. And actually what they came back was with a sort of massive document of how to change the entire system so that creativity was incorporated throughout it. But I think creativity has to be incorporated throughout it. You have to, you know, it's where interdisciplinary work comes in, but you being creative in history or maths or, you know, or any of the subjects that we don't associate it with creativity is so important because it's a muscle, right? The more you use it, the easier it is. And it's, once we get out of school and out the safety net of all of that, we're all sort of creatively trying to figure out how to make ends meet and how to, you know, get from one step to the next with it. In terms of strategies that I've seen, I think my favorite ones are ones that put child voice in there first and foremost. You know, that have this relationship where teachers and the students learn from each other. And that role changes back and forth. Dad would talk about a study that someone did, and I forget who it was now, but about what theatre is. You know, do you need the set and the script and the costumes and the lighting and the stage and all of that? What can you take away and have it still be theatre? And essentially what they found is that really all you need is a person performing and a person watching. So you need a performer and an audience member, and that's it for it to be theatre. You don't need a script and the set and the costumes. And Dad took that and applied it to education. What do you need to make educational learning happen? Do you need a curriculum and an interactive whiteboard or an iPad, or do you need pens and paper, or what do you need? And actually, you strip it all down. What you need is somebody teaching and somebody learning for education to be happening, or two people to be learning together, as they go. And actually, I think sometimes all the noise of things like the tech is in a way that we're able to do so much more now, and personalized learning, particularly thanks to the technology developments that we have, are going to be so critical. But I remember I worked for a project called 100 that looked at the future of education from Finland's perspective, and my job was to interview 100 education thought leaders on the future of education. And people in Canada were like interactive whiteboards, and this was a few years ago when they were all the rage. And people were saying, we want the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage, and all this kind of stuff. And then I got to somebody from Bangladesh, and she said, we need classrooms. We need teachers to feel safe enough to show up. And I suddenly thought, how do you look at the future of education on a global perspective when we're all at such different starting blocks or midway blocks? And actually, I think some of those, not to sugarcoat the realities that a lot of schools are in, but I do actually think that sometimes when you take away the noise of everything that you feel you should be having, that's where creativity thrives, when you're trying to make things work with less, actually, very often. So yeah, my favorite strategies for creativity in education are when you strip most of it away and you look at that relationship between a teacher and a learner, or two learners together figuring it out as they go.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And actually that sums it up nicely for my final question, which is to say, if you were to design a dream, I want to say school or education setting, for 25 years in the future, what would it look like?
Well, I hopefully this won't be a dream, because we're going to do it with Robinson pedagogy.
Yes.
You're right. It would be, it would have a huge amount of connection to nature. I love principles of. I don't think any of the Steiner or the Montessori or any of those have got it pitch perfect. They're all, each of them, at least 100 years old. I think it's unrealistic to have an entire childhood that has absolutely no technology, and I don't think it's helpful in this day and age. But I do think there are elements, particularly when it comes to Steiner Waldorf education, to do with following the Earth's natural rhythms, that are hugely important. It would be ones where there's less pressure. There's that from any age there's that room to play and explore, and create, where it's really about the healthy ecosystem, but mostly about genuine, authentic human connection, between students and between the peers and between teachers and between parents. And it's, and I feel really lucky, actually, because I feel like we found a version of that for Adeline and her school. Otherwise, we would absolutely be home educating right the way through, because that's what that gave us. That year that we spent together home educating was a chance to just really build the relationship and the connection. And that's, that's what it all comes down to.
Beautiful. Oh, I really, really can't wait to hear about the Robinson pedagogy. Do you have like
Thanks, me neither.
Yeah, do you have like a timeline, or is it just a case of we're taking the archive and we're going to work with it now?
Yeah. No timeline. The sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned. We're working on creating partnerships at the moment to make it happen, and I think a big part of that, actually, a community like this will be very helpful with, for people to to send in how they interpret Dad's work and where they're taking it, that we can build off as well. Because it's the other, I guess, last thing to say about the archive is that it's a living archive. It lives and breathes in the work that everybody on the ground and all these people here do on a daily basis. Dad would say it's a human system, education. It happens in the beating heart of the people who are doing it. It's not the systems or the tests, it's the humans. So we'll be gathering oral histories and stories of people that they have, people who met him and the stories of him specifically, but also people who never did, who were inspired by him to go on and incorporate his work into their work. So yeah, there's a huge amount of work to do with it. I wish I could show you guys the whole, take you into the archive itself and show you all the boxes, but yeah, it's as close as we have to having him with us.
Maybe that can be a future video tour or something.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
What a privilege to have you here this evening,
No,
Kate,
thank
and
you. Thank you for
for
the
showing
opportunity.
us a little bit of an insight into your dad's extremely amazing mind, and how amazing that he put so much of it down on paper as well.
Treasure, huh?
Brilliant to be able to see it. Um, I hope it's inspired everyone else in the audience tonight as well, as much as it has done me. I certainly feel privileged to be able to be here and talk to you about it. As we've done with all of our other summit sessions, we actually have a prize to give away for someone today who has come along live to the session. So we have a copy of Imagine If, which is the book that Kate wrote, co-authored with Ken, Sir Ken, which he started and she finished, and I've read it. It's very good. So it's an absolute it's really a joy to read, and I feel like it's but my thoughts on it was because obviously I'm a total Ken fangirl, so I've got all of the books and I've read them all. I feel like this sort of sums up a lot of what he wrote about in his life. So it's like if you need something to kind of get into, get into the mind of Sir Ken, this is it.
It was intended to be either an overview or an introduction, depending on which end of the spectrum of
Yeah.
introduction to his work you
Yeah.
are. It was,
Yeah.
they can say, oh, and let me show you also, sorry, before we do the giveaway.
Yeah.
We turned it because Dad's vision was that it be a manifesto, and we turned it, I got all my children sleeping. We turned it into this really beautiful manifesto poster that I've just
Amazing.
smashed.
Oh.
Which you can actually, it's on secondrumster.com if you would like to buy it, shameless plug. But it's yeah, it's a really, I could do a signed giveaway of this as well.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, if I mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I say so myself.
Fantastic. Well, yes, so we have a winner, someone who has arrived this evening. So let me just grab up who we have the winner tonight. And the winner of this one tonight is Sarah Armitage. So Sarah Armitage, congratulations. You have won a copy of Imagine If that will be signed by Kate. So well done for winning that one tonight. Thank you again.